Hey guys, my name is Wren, and I'm bad at art. Today I have a full process video for you. That means you get to see the beginning of my sketch, and also the transfer to watercolor paper, and then the whole watercoloring process. The picture that I'm doing today is a drawing of my friend Michael. I've known him since I was like 10, maybe 11. We've been friends for a really long time. And he jokingly told me to make him hot on my Instagram. So here I am, drawing him as he is, because he is hot. I was just sitting on my couch and sketching, and I figured that for this video, I wouldn't do any sort of setup for the drawing aspect of it, just because I was comfortable. I normally make myself sit up and film properly for all parts of my videos, but I was really just, hanging out, doing my thing, and I wasn't totally sure what I wanted to do, if I really wanted to do anything with this piece. I was kind of thinking maybe this video would just be a hang out and watch me sketch sort of thing. I was planning on doing maybe 3 different, or maybe even 4 different drawings, and I ended up doing 2, but I liked this first one more. So this first one is the one that I ended up using in the final piece. The second one was really helpful. Obviously, I don't like how it turned out as much. It did not capture his likeness the way that the first one did, and in addition to that, it was just much looser, and it was beneficial because it really helped me see where the planes of his face are, and the things that I did wrong in the second one that I did right in the first one, but also the things that I did wrong in maybe both of them, and the things that I did wrong in the first one and not the second one. So I did go in, make a couple of adjustments before heading over to transferring it to the watercolor paper, but for the most part, it just really kept the first one the way it was. I did a really good job on that one. I'm really proud of how even just the sketch turned out. I really love the sketch as it is, but the final piece, man, I did such a good job. Moving into this second piece, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on with this one. I kept it really loose. I was using a different reference photo, so there's that to keep in mind while looking at this. I liked the flow of the hair, I liked the movement that it had in it, but it just didn't have the same structure, and I think that's something I've really been liking about my art recently, is how much structure I've been able to keep, especially in portraits. And this one, I went in with much less structure, I went in with a much rounder shapes, much looser. Overall, I like the feeling of it a lot, but like I said, I didn't capture his likeness, and I was really going for that. I don't always go for that, but this time I was. And therefore, not properly capturing his likeness was something that I wasn't super thrilled with. But this one did help me really visualize, the shape of his lower lip, which is something that's very important on his face. And the angle of between the eyebrow area and the shape of his nose. It was all things that, obviously, I drew it once. I kind of have an idea of what it feels like and what it looks like, but drawing it a second time from another angle just really reinforced, this shape is really angular or this shape is really soft. And that was really good practice, especially before going in with the color and the shading and all of the details. I do think my biggest issue with this second one was not even how loose I started, but how fatigued I was from drawing. I don't know how many of you guys experience this, but I find I can do one thing that I'm proud of in a sitting. If I try to do more than one thing in a sitting, it can work if I'm not thrilled with the first thing. But I did pretty automatically know that the first sketch that I did was exactly what I was hoping for, and that kind of made me feel like the second sketch that I did wasn't as important. And you know, I think that's fair. I think I'm allowed to feel like the second thing that I do isn't as important. I pretty much knew I wasn't going to be going in and doing this one as the main watercolor piece. I was kind of doing it because I wanted it to turn out, but more than anything, I was doing it for the extra practice before going into that watercolor painting. Perhaps if I had just gone in with the same amount of value in the sketch piece, it would have turned out a little bit better. But maybe not even that. I really do think that my heart wasn't in it. This one, it was there for the practice. I mean, we're going back to what I was saying in a couple videos ago, and I'll say it again. Not everything you make has to be really good. And I just got to keep reminding myself that not everything I make has to be good enough to show people. Now, generally, I leave lightbox things out of my videos. It's one of my least favorite things to see personally, but I just thought that it was so silly how close my face was to this paper. My lightbox isn't very bright, and the paper is relatively thick. I was just like, while I was doing the very first one, because I did the two of them here, laughing that I was absolutely horizontal, lying on top of my lightbox to get this thing transferred over to watercolor paper. Anyways, jumping into the painting. Pretty standard stuff here. I do have a wider palette than I normally use. So on this palette, I have, of course, my Brilliant Red. I also have Yellow Ochre, no surprises here. Burnt Sienna, which is one that I used in my last video that I've actually really come to enjoy. Phthalo Blue, Ultramarine Blue, and Payne's Gray. All of the new colors here, so our Burnt Sienna, our Ultramarine Blue, and our Payne's Gray. New, because it's not one of my 3 top most used colors. They're all colors that I really liked the last time I experimented with using more colors. In the last video I did with the little tiefling dude. With this, I decided to do the same thing I did in the last video where I had 2 options for different colors, sort of. And I wanted to do one that was there to keep me loose and to sort of experiment, and one to stay really structured and really muted, really as neutral as I could keep myself. And I'm really glad that I went this approach. So in the top one here, I went right in, as usual, with my Brilliant Red, a touch of Yellow Ochre. And on the bottom one, instead of starting with red like normal, I went right in with Payne's Gray. I then went back up. I did a little bit of Payne's Gray, but mostly Ultramarine Blue for all of my shadows. And I mixed some of that Ultramarine Blue with the Yellow Ochre and the Burnt Sienna to get that hair color, the really desaturated, the desaturated brown. I love the way this color looks. I also really like the way that you can really build it up or build it down, so you can get a really blonde, sort of like ashy blonde color, or you can get a really saturated brown or a desaturated brown, a brunette of so many different tones and coolness or warmness, all of it. Because there is blue in that brown color, I started by adding a little bit more blue than I had originally and going in with the shadows on the lower one. I pop back up to the top one and I add in my yellow ochre with a touch of brilliant red for the yellow tones in the skin. And then when I go back down to the bottom one, I was actually a little bit too nervous to jump into a red, so I pick the Payne's Gray back up and I add a little bit more dimension to those shadows. You actually will see, it takes me a long time to properly build up the shadow in that bottom one, and so much of that was because I just went for it in the top one, and it ended up being much more dramatic than I meant for it to be, which is not surprising because I do that in every single painting that I do. I have two versions, one where I just do it and I'm like, oh no, and the other one where I'm just too afraid to do it, so it's like, oh no. I'll get there eventually. It's a process. While I'm building up the shadow on the bottom one, I'm trying to make sure that my dark ranges are dark enough without being too dark right now, because that was scaring me. The issue I was having with these pieces, both of them, because I use Payne's Gray in both of them, is that Payne's Gray loves to lift. Most of these watercolors, at least the ones that I've used a decent amount, you can glaze over them just fine. You don't lift the color back up, it doesn't smudge, it doesn't smear, and this Payne's Gray, oh my goodness, I was having such a hard time with it. I would put it down and I would let it sit for 10, 15, maybe even 20 minutes, and I would just let it sit and I would let it dry, and it would be totally dry, and I would touch a little bit of yellow or a little bit of red to it, and it was just whoosh, the wet on wet effect of putting a little bit of color down where it just got everywhere. And I ended up being able to do a really good job of controlling it, but it got everywhere. The red color that I decided to use on the bottom, obviously, is my Brilliant Red mix, but I mixed a lot more yellow into it than I normally do. And part of the reason for that was that I was trying to keep it more desaturated. I was trying to keep it not realistic per se, but more realistic. I love using my saturated reds. I love using my saturated blues. But this one, this piece here specifically, with this dynamic lighting, with this very specific mood I was going for, and obviously I went for the saturation up top. I decided to keep it as neutral as possible the whole time. And while this is something that I'm not really familiar with doing, this piece turned out so good because of it. I was able to mix a really warm combination of the burnt sienna, the yellow ochre, and the ultramarine blue to get that darker hair shadow color. And I took it and I added a little bit more texture into the longer parts, added some shadow up to the top, down to the bottom, and all the way on that right side. And it just gives so much life to this muted blues in the background, blue tinted shadows, and then just having this really warm shadow in the hair. I just really loved the effect that that had. When I put in the yellow on the final piece, my actual piece here, I was really, really nervous about overpowering the feeling of the whole piece. So I kept my yellow very red, the same way that I kept my red very yellow, to try to keep it in a very similar vein. And like I said, I'm just absolutely thrilled with how this piece turned out. I did, however, when I put the yellow down, lose a lot of my red. So you can see here, I'm adding a bit more of that red back in. I thought that was really important because just the very flushed cheeks is something that I was feeling, not only for the mood of the piece, but every time that I looked up at the top one, the most Michael thing about it for me was how red those cheeks were and the little bit of red up in the forehead. I just feel like I did such a good job capturing what he looks like. This piece really feels like him to me. I added a little bit of purple in, and I'm about to lift some of that off of the eyelid here. But that purple, just to add a little bit more life, a little more dimension to the shadows. All of my shadows are very blue, so adding some purple in there. I add some purple at the collar of the shirt and along the side of the face where there's more hair, so the left side of the page. And this was all just to give a little bit more dimension, a little bit more life. But that pretty much sums up my whole process on this one. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you for hanging out, as always, watching me experiment, watching me do my thing. It really does mean a lot that I have people that I know that come and watch my videos. I had so much fun with this piece. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.